Max Harrington had always been used to the world humming to his frequency. Glass elevators rising higher, phones flashing green graphs, bizarre ideas turning into billion-dollar markets. On Monday morning at 6:12 a.m., his daughter called him. Not a secretary, not a risk advisor, not a lawyer. It was 8-year-old Sophie, her voice hoarse from sleep. "Dad, why is Uncle Owen on TV saying you're a liar?" Max froze as if the battery in his chest had suddenly been changed. He turned on the news. On the screen was the company's CFO, a former college friend and almost a brother, holding a flash drive. These are copies of internal correspondence proving liquidity manipulation and false asset overstatement during the merger. Max couldn't hear his own pulse. He could only hear the distant hum of the neon in the kitchen and the faint creak of a crystal glass under his fingers. "Owen, what are you doing?" he whispered to the empty room. He remembered how he and Owen had been feverishly writing the first algorithm in the cramped dormitory, with a stool propped against the door so that no one would disturb them. "You told me yourself. Don't lie to the numbers." The whisper of the past sounded like a sentence. The phone rang endlessly. The board of directors, investors, reporters who had smelled blood. The house smelled of burnt toast. The cook had pressed it to the bottom of the trash can as if she could put out the fire that was burning in Max's world. "Mr. Harrington, the lawyers are on the line." The secretary's dry voice stumbled over the loudspeaker, startled. Max squared his shoulders. "Cancel the meetings." "No, keep one, for Owen." He looked out the dark window of New York, where morning was still just beginning, and felt how the luxurious penthouse had become too big, like a suit, too heavy, like a name, too loud. "Dad, you're not a liar, are you?" Rang again in his memory. He didn't answer his daughter then, and now he didn't know how to answer himself either. When the elevator doors parted and Owen stood in the office with a blank look, Max smiled out of the corner of his mouth, the way one smiles before a gunshot. "Why?" he asked. "Because the truth is tired of waiting," Owen answered. It sounded beautiful and unbearably painful. Everything he had built an empire of numbers for collapsed in a split second. The markets opened, and a cold, intelligent panic poured out. The board of directors declared the CEO suspended pending the completion of the investigation. The SEC sent subpoenas. The media who had photographed his branded sneakers yesterday were now filming close-ups of his eyelids twitching. Max rushed into the crisis room. "We never substituted cash flow for profit. We optimized cross-margin liquidity within the limits of what was permitted," he snapped at the lawyers. "Who is permitted?" Rivera's lawyer clarified dryly. Letters flashed on the screen. Phrases taken out of context, stretched to their worst possible meaning. Excel spreadsheets with curves that looked like predators. Max's comment. "Make it look inevitable." Make it look inevitable. He meant, make the forecast not as luck, but as a trend. Now it read like criminal intent. "You're kidding," his wife, Lauren, said that evening, when the house smelled of candle smoke, set to calm his nerves. "We built these walls of trust," he replied automatically. She smiled bitterly. "We or you?" There was a deep, tired knowledge in her eyes. Yes, he was generous. Yes, he gave grants to foundations. Yes, he paid out bounties. But he also saw the world as a game board, where every sacrifice was justified if the king moved forward. The next day, fragments of contracts with small startups that had signed with a buyback option in the event of unforeseen circumstances were leaked online. It was insurance, as legal as it was cynical. What was left behind was the shattered dreams of those whose dreams he had bought back for pennies in an hour when the market was tumbling. "Max, we got a text from a guy in Texas. He says he lost his house because of us," the assistant whispered. "He was signing a contract," he replied, as if that would justify anything. When Owen spoke a second time and called him the architect of inevitability, the audience erupted in laughter and applause. And that's when something inside Max finally snapped. Not from the stock market crash, but from the crash in Sophie's eyes. She didn't leave the room when he got home. She just left a note on the table. "The truth hurts, but lies kill." In baby letters. It was worse than any summons. On the third day, as the noise gradually faded to a white background, an unsigned letter arrived in Max's inbox. "You're not seeing the whole board. Start with 2014. Vault, Hestia." Attached was an encrypted archive and a key string that consisted of a piece of their old college password, the same one that had once protected the code for the first algorithm. Owen, or someone who knew enough about them to open a door to the past. He went not to the office, but to an old co-working space in Brooklyn, where the smell of coffee and the metal of stairs rang. There, on an old laptop that was not connected to any corporate network, he opened Hestia. Inside were logs of correspondence that had never passed through official servers, call records, hidden deals from the fund that stood above him, the investment group that quietly dictated the contours of inevitability. There was the senator's name, the name of the offshore company, and, worst of all, Owen's signature on a memorandum from 3 years ago. Hire, it's pressing. If we don't support the assessment, we'll be eaten. Max leaned back in his chair and laughed, a low, almost silent laugh. So you played too? He whispered into the old brick wall. The phone vibrated, a number without a name. You found it, said a voice that sounded like a muffled crunch. Who are you? Max asked. A former analyst. I saw them cover their tracks, and I saw you keep quiet. But you're not the boss, Max. The boss is the one who makes the wolves starve and fight. Why would I want this? There was no gratitude in his voice. There was fatigue. Because you have two choices. Either burn alone, and they will applaud you, or tear off the mask of the whole booth, and they will hate you. In both cases, you pay. The choice is only in what you pay for. The line broke. He thought about Sophie, about Lauren, about Owen, who perhaps thought he was saving himself in an ocean where everyone swallows everyone. At the bottom of the archive was another folder, Aurora. In it, Owen's conversation with above, Max will not stop. He believes in inevitability. So make him the inevitable victim. Max closed his eyes. The world turned upside down. Now he knew that the game was wider than his kingdom. All he had to do was decide whether to blow it up, along with himself. The congressional hearing room was as cold as an operating room. The cameras buzzed like mosquitoes before the rain. Max sat at his desk, his hands open. No watch, no rings. Rivera leaned toward him. Remember, answer narrowly. Don't give interpretations. He nodded, and realized he was going to do the opposite. Mr. Harrington, did your company manipulate asset valuations? The first question hit like a starting pistol. Yes, Max said. The air in the room sucked in sharply. But we were just a link. Here, he placed the Hestia flash drive on the table, are records of pressure from the funds that own us through a nested doll of companies. There are names. There are dates. There are voices of those who taught us to call greed a strategy. Do you understand what you are doing now? Hissed the senator whose name Max had seen in the files. Yes. For the first time, I'm not telling the truth to survive, Max replied. The cameras ate every syllable. He talked about Aurora, about the mechanics of crushing startups, about how their victories were planned as coldly as other people's defeats. He didn't justify himself. On the contrary, he turned his own decisions inside out, like pockets from which poured out not a trifle, but years of other people's lives. After the hearing, Lauren stood in the hallway, pale but straight. You chose fire, she said quietly. I chose for Sophie to know that her father was not afraid, he replied. You could lose everything. Her voice broke. Everything is not what I thought. Max smiled without joy. He didn't know what would happen tomorrow. Arrest? Collapse? Silence. All he knew was that for the first time the air seemed clean. That evening, Owen came alone. No lawyers, no cameras. You destroyed us both, he said. Max nodded. You sold me out before, he replied. Owen lowered his eyes. I thought I was saving the company. You were saving yourself, Max said calmly. Just like I have all these years. The court banned him from running public companies for 10 years. The foundations cut ties with him. The house had to be sold, not out of celebration, but out of quiet calculation. But as Max carried out the last box of children's drawings, Sophie took his hand. Are you poor now? She asked. I am now. I am learning to count differently, he replied, and felt that for the first time he was not lying. He had created a small laboratory of transparent finance, open risk models accessible to every entrepreneur, where there was no black magic of the inevitable. The first week brought an avalanche of skepticism, memes, ridicule, and a few letters from founders who had saved the companies when they saw the abyss in time. He had become a class traitor to some, an idealist to others, and a forgotten temptation of the news cycle to most. And that was a good thing. For the first time, his name was not the main product. One evening, he met Owen on the embankment. He looked older than he was. "I'm learning how to start from scratch," Owen said, looking out at the dark water. "It's harder than growing from 10 to 100, Max replied. They were silent for a long time. "Do you think it's possible to be rich and honest?" Owen finally asked. Max sighed. "Honesty is not a balance in an account. It's a price you pay every day. Wealth is just about how much you have, and honesty is about how much you have left." He hadn't become a saint. He remembered every signature, every outline of cynicism in himself. But now he had a different kind of capital, the ability to say no when yes seemed inevitable. He was learning to admit defeat, to apologize not as a PR strategy, but as a job. Sophie showed him a school project one day, How My Dad Learned to Guard the Truth. He read it and cried, not from shame, but from that strange, quiet happiness that comes when you stop being afraid of your own shadow. Is it possible to be rich and honest? You can, but you will have to pay with what is more important than money: sleep, reputation, seats in boxes, and friendships that loved only heights. What is more important, truth or success? Success without truth is just a sign above an empty hall. Can you redeem the past? No, but you can build the future so that the past ceases to be an instruction. Max raised his eyes to the New York sky, where rare stars barely broke through the city lights, and realized, sometimes the richest decisions are those that make you lighter. And when it becomes easier to breathe, you begin to hear your truth speaking from within. And this time, his voice did not betray him.